Hola, bienvenidos a la clase de español. Two of the most useful verbs in Spanish are hacer and ir, and they're both irregular in the preterite tense. So today, let's go over the preterite of hacer and ir, el pretérito de hacer e ir. Now, while the verbs hacer and ir are irregular in the preterite tense, we're going to see some familiar patterns because their conjugations are based on the regular preterite endings. However, both of these verbs do have irregular stems and irregular endings in the preterite tense. Additionally, the conjugated forms of these verbs have no accents. So since these conjugations bear some resemblance to regular verbs in the preterite tense, let's go over the regular verb endings first. For AR verbs, the regular endings are haste, o, amos, hastes, aron. And for ER and IRs in the preterite tense, iste, yo, imos, istes, and hieron. Now let's keep those endings in mind so that we can see the pattern that we follow when we conjugate the verbs hacer and ir. Let's start with the verb hacer. As I mentioned before, hacer has an irregular stem in the preterite tense, and that's an irregular stem in all forms. So that preterite tense stem for hacer is is, and our default spelling for is hic. Now, in addition to having the irregular stem, hacer has irregular endings. And let's go ahead and conjugate. For the yo form, we're going to take our AR ending, but with no accent. So it's going to be ise. For our tu form, we're going to take our ER-IR ending. It's going to be hiciste. For our usted LA form, we're going to go back to our AR ending with no accent, and it's going to be iso. Now notice how I have to spell iso. If I were to keep the C from my default spelling of the stem, then I would have to pronounce that H-I-C-O as hico. Sorry, hico. Just a minute. Hico. Much better. Anyway, I would have to pronounce that with a hard C. And as I mentioned before, the stem isn't ik, but is. So in order to maintain that pronunciation in Spanish, I have to change the C to a Z. The pronunciation remains the same, iso, but I spell it H-I-Z-O. On the plural side, we're going to take all of our endings from the ER and IR verbs. So I'm going to have hicimos, hicistes, and hicieron. So for this verb, we have our irregular preterite tense stem, is, and then for the yo form and the usted LA form, we get our endings from the AR verbs, but drop the accents. We also have to have a spelling change, the C changing to a Z in the usted LA form. The other forms, the tú, nosotros, nosotras, vosotros, vosotras, and ustedes, ellos, ellas, are all exactly the same as the ER-IR endings in the preterite tense. And it might help you to remember that the usted LA form is spelled H-I-Z-O or H to the is-o in order to maintain the pronunciation. Now remember that we're going to use the verb hacer a lot in questions to ask what somebody did. I could ask you, ¿Qué hiciste la semana pasada? What did you do last week? Or I might ask you, ¿Qué hizo tu profesora de ciencias sociales en clase hoy? What did your social studies teacher do in class today? However, when we answer those questions, we're probably just going to use the appropriate form of a different verb, the verb that indicates what we did. Unless the thing that we did literally is the verb hacer, like yo hice mi tarea, I did my homework. Or nosotros hicimos ejercicio, we exercised. So for the verb hacer, remember irregular stem, irregular endings, and the forms are hice, hiciste, hizo with a Z, hicimos, hicistes, and hicieron. Now for the verb ir, we also have an irregular stem with irregular endings. And the irregular stem for the verb ir is two letters that you have to say separately. And those two letters are F and U. All of the forms of ir start with F and U. Where do those letters come from? I don't know. But I just conjugate it. I don't go against it. I don't fight it because I'm not a foo fighter. So for our conjugated forms of the verb ir in the preterite tense, for the yo form, we start with our stem and we add the ER-IR ending with no accent, fui. The tu form also has the ER-IR ending, fuiste. Now the usted LA form is a little bit tricky because that ending just comes out of nowhere, and it's fue with an E as the ending. The nosotros and vosotros forms again have the regular er-ir endings, so they're fuimos and fuisteis. And then for the ustedes, ellos, ellas form, we have to modify that er-ir ending a little bit by getting rid of the I, and that ending is going to be fueron. So altogether, fui, fuiste, fue, fuimos, fuisteis, fueron. Now, one of the things that can be challenging with the verb ir in the preterite tense is when you have a form that has the I and when you have a form that has the E in the ending. But if you look at the verb chart, the yo form is fui, to form fuiste. Nosotros fuimos, vosotros fuisteis. The top four forms all have an I as the first letter in the ending. And the bottom two forms, fue and fueron, start with an E in the ending. So remember, the four endings that have the I are on top, and the two endings that start with E are on the bottom of the verb chart. Another thing that might help you remember this is that the word yo means I in English, and it's the yo form that has the I, fui. On the other hand, él and ella mean he and she, and it's the él, ella form that's fue with the letter E in the ending. Now, when we use the verb ir in a sentence, remember that we almost always use it with a preposition, and most of the time our preposition is going to be a meaning to. So we might ask the question, ¿A dónde fuiste el verano pasado? Where did you go last summer? And I have the a in the question word ¿a dónde? And if someone asked me that, I might respond, Yo fui a la playa. I went to the beach. Or I might say, Yo fui a las montañas. I went to the mountains. Or I might say, Yo fui al centro comercial. I went to the mall. And remember that if we have a followed by el, that forms the contraction al. So remember, your forms of ir in the preterite tense start with the irregular stem with the letters F and U, and then the endings are mostly the same as the er-ir endings with no accents, except we don't have an I in the bottom forms, and we have that random E in the usted, el, ella form. So altogether, fui, fuiste, fue, fuimos, fuisteis, fueron. Gracias por ver este video. Adiós.